Hello and a very warm welcome to Hodge On Nodge. For those of you joining the stream today, sadly, because of a technical error, I am not going to have my lovely intro music. So you've not had that treat, Charlie, the lovely wee jingle I put together. We're not going to hear today. But anyone who's listening to the audio podcast back, I'll be able to add that on afterwards. So there's a treat for anyone who listens to Hodge On Nodge on the podcast players. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. If you are watching in the comments, then please do let us know. Please do get in touch. And as you can see, I have with me the Sun's football editor, Charlie Wyett. Charlie, do you know what? I'm actually really pleased to get you on because it's nice to have you, and we're going to be able to talk about Norwich City, club close to your heart. Absolutely. So first off, I want to know the story of like you growing up as a Norwich fan, how your love for the club came about.
I'm from near Hunstanton, just outside the village called Thornham. Norwich fans, obviously family. First game was Norwich Wolves, 0-0 draw, 9th February 79. Second game was a year later, the Justin Fashanu goal, 5-3 Liverpool. And just they're my team. So first game I covered probably was in 1992 and 93, and even though I was working for papers in Cambridgeshire doing a bit of stuff for the Nationals, and then I think I did 2 games for the EDP when Trevor Burton was on holiday in 1995, the year Norwich got relegated, and then joined the Sun 25 years ago, been there ever since, and obviously sort of do Norwich here and there. I mean, we cover all the Norwich games, even when they're in League One. We'd always have a journalist at the games home and away. But I
was that common practice then for the Nationals, or had a lot?
No,
of
we
at that point?
We still do. We still pay to have a journalist at every EFL game, and that's even now, whether it's Sutton or Barrow, we've got someone there, and so we sort of stick with Norwich all the time. But in terms of personally, I probably tend to do them when they're in the Premier League. So I was there on Saturday for the Liverpool match. So
but is that just glory hunting, or is that because of your purview now is so senior?
Yeah, that's the office sending me really, and I do sort of a fair amount of sort of the Liverpool away games, so it's good. It's actually, I mean, I much prefer watching them. As a fan, sort of go, probably 8 or 9 times away from home. But I go when I can, basically. If I'm off, my son's a season ticket holder as well. If I'm off, I'll go and watch him.
Where does he sit?
He's in the lower Barclay.
Oh, perfect.
No,
prime singing position.
He's just moved as well to slightly lively a bit. So so he's enjoying that. Yeah.
Good stuff. So I think the first thing that, from my perspective, journalistically, I think you hit upon a really interesting thing, because a lot of people, their only experience of going to the football is as a fan. But when you're working on a game, so for myself, that could be commentary, or it could be writing a match report, or running match report, whatever it is, it's a totally different experience to when you're actually just sitting there as a fan watching the game. And for you, what do you think the kind of key distinction is between the experience of when you're working a game and when you're watching it? Like, could you encapsulate that in any particular way? Just how different it feels?
It's totally different, isn't it? You know, it's totally different. You have to, when you're watching a game, you obviously have an emotion and you want your team to win, but equally because you are concentrating on your job and what you're doing. And for example, on Saturday it was a 5:30 kickoff, which is obviously a later one, which means when the ref blew the final whistle, we have to send the match report, and all the other journalists, the written journalists, we have to send that match report on the final whistle. That's for the website, and then for the paper, we have a little bit of time for the manager quotes. So you're concentrating on the game, and going as a supporter is just a totally different experience, and and I'm glad it is as well. And
should be.
And I think it's. I'm not saying it's absolutely vital, but I think it's very important for journalists to still go and watch games as supporters, and I think the majority do. Certainly, in my experience, but some don't, and I just think sometimes you have to remember the experiences of what it's like to travel halfway up the country, see your team play like a sack of what, get absolutely drenched on, have an enjoyable but equally awful day, and it's cost you £100. So I think it's good to still have that.
Do you know what, though, as well, right? So a lot of people think, yeah, journalism get paid to go and watch football. And sometimes when you're in, especially like if you take an EFL season, you've got 46 games, probably 50 if you incorporate cup games, give or take, right? Now, that it's a long slog, and it's arduous, it's hard work. But see, when you go as a fan and you have an experience of the ilk that you just described, what it does is it kind of reminds you of your privilege, like when you are going out and you're covering games. Rather than spending £100 to go and watch your team get beat 3-0 in the rain 150 miles away, you're actually getting paid to do that. And it kind of, when you have an experience of the type, like I went to Southampton away last time in the Premier League, and we were pretty dreadful in that.
No, I was there. I went as a fan. I was there, yeah.
I was the same. So I went and I watched that game, and it was pretty abject, wasn't it? So on that basis, you were thinking, I think that was the game that killed Amadou as well. I think that was, if it wasn't his last appearance, it was his last
midweek game, wasn't it?
Yeah. But you can remember after an experience like that, it's like, yeah, well, you know what I mean? What about these people that are diehards? They do that week in, week out. They're there, home and away, and it just gives you a whole newfound respect, especially for me, right, in England, because growing up in Scotland, it's a smaller country. Right. So, I mean, even if you've got trips to like Ross County or Aberdeen or whatever it is from where I am down in Ayrshire, then, I mean, it's not quite the same as going to Newcastle away. The trips to Wales from Norwich are really, really long if you do those, So, yeah, I mean, respect. I'm going to shout out a major shout out of respect to all of the fans that do that week in, week out. Now, just before we go on, Charlie, we're going to go on to talk about what it's like covering your own club in the media, and whether the media generally have been a bit unfair to Norwich in the pre-season predictions. So we are going to come on to that. But what I want to do, now, this is something I've not done technologically in this stream, guys. So if it doesn't work, please be patient with me. But one of my podcast ninjas, Ryan Livermore, has put together a cracking video which just encapsulates what it's like being back in a stadium watching football. So I'm going to get that. Hopefully that plays all right, and then we'll come back in, Charlie. So just enjoy this video, mate. Excellent stuff. Ryan also dedicating that video to anyone who couldn't make it back to the football as well. But that was quite special. Now, I'm not one for playing out bits of video content in this podcast very often, Charlie, but I just thought that was so good. I mean, there were a few quite clever film editory techniques there to just properly make you feel like that experience of going back to the football. I didn't get to go to the game. I've just been going to behind closed doors games ad infinitum now. I've not had that experience yet, but it's just great to have proper football back, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and he got everything in there, didn't he? And it just ticked each box of the match day. And you touched on the point earlier there that in terms of the distances involved, and if you're a journalist and you've got the privilege of watching football, particularly of course when it was behind closed doors. But the one thing I think we do forget of all teams, but I think particularly a team like Norwich in the county the size of Norfolk, that you mentioned sort of going to Wales for an away game. But what struck me is obviously the amount of people that watch all the Norwich games who are coming from Wales and the Midlands and the North, and what they have to sacrifice. They're leaving home at 8 o'clock in the morning, and also because you've got some clubs, let's say. Giving an example, Brentford, for example, they've come in. Their supporter base is obviously much smaller, but it's quite tight to West London, isn't it? Where of course, in Norwich, to get from North Norfolk, where I'm from, particularly where there's no a way of getting to Norwich with public transport, and if you're in Kings Lynn or if you're in Yarmouth or you're in Thetford, that it's quite some distance you're travelling just for home games, let alone Cambridgeshire and even parts of Suffolk that obviously prefer to watch Norwich. So fans give their whole day just to watch home games, let alone away. So I think you have to appreciate and take into account, but not just financially, what football fans put into supporting their club, but just the time.
No, granted, but see holistically for the game. I mean, obviously the football without fans is nothing. Some of the greatest managers have said words to that effect. Matt Busby, Jock Stein. I think everyone realises how important fans are. But for me, see as a product, as a spectacle, whatever nomenclature you want to use, right? It's just not the experience of watching a game is transformed. See, commentating, right? That's one of the things I do for a living. Commentating a game when there was no fans there, you had to work so much harder to make the narrative pop, right? Whereas, see, what I've noticed that I keep doing in my commentaries now is I'm letting the pictures breathe, because you're just hearing fans roaring as players run over to them to celebrate a goal. And, mate, it's absolutely brilliant. And I try not to be jealous in my life, right? Well, do you know what? I'll qualify it. I'm not jealous, but I am very envious of every single Norwich City fan that got to go to that Liverpool game, because it just looked like, and that first on the ball City that we saw at the end of the video there, it was absolute, the noise, man, like unbelievable. You must have heard that like at the other end of the city. Like it was quite spectacular.
Yeah, it was good. I think we knew it probably would be, didn't we? Just with that build up of emotion, and hopefully a few more that noisy this season.
Yeah, indeed. With the Liverpool game, just touching on that briefly, what did you see? What was your kind of analysis in terms of that and what it showed in terms of where Norwich City are and how they're set up for this season?
Yeah, I actually don't think either team played their best.
No, I agree.
Norwich, you have to take into account, the very, very difficult, 3-4 weeks beforehand, only having 10 players at training until the week before. As we know, having players that have not played in pre-season at all. And of course, having new signings. So I think we knew that. I don't think Liverpool were great. They deserved to win. I can see in terms of Norwich did well to keep it at 1-0 until middle of the second half. Equally, Liverpool should have scored a couple more in the first half due to the mistakes being made at the back. So I don't think you can take a great deal from it, and there's nothing massively to worry about it really either. And the same goes for the game against Manchester City. I think Liverpool were just happy to have got the win. And I thought Norwich had some encouraging performances. Still a bit too open at the back, but then look, it's the first game. I don't think.
Well, yeah, it's the first game, but it almost feels like the end of pre-season as well.
Yeah.
I think there's a danger of letting that narrative sort of exonerate some of the negative things that are there. But what I would point out is it does very much, and actually, even though the fixture list has been harsh, given the sort of set of circumstances, the COVID and outbreak and all of that sort of stuff, that's led to us being at the point where this does feel kind of like the end of pre-season and that we're still priming ourselves for the race ahead. Kind of having these sort of a lot less winnable fixtures at the start of the season might actually turn out to be a blessing in disguise, I'm thinking.
Agree, totally. I 100% agree with you. I think, again, tomorrow, Man City's a free hit. Leicester to a degree also. I never feel. I understand why people look at the first 4 games. I'm looking at the first 3 games because Arsenal, both last season and particularly now, are a team that I think Norwich, even away, could be looking to have a real go at. So I think 3 very difficult opening games, but I think by the time get to the Arsenal match, I think the players would fancy it, to be honest.
I think so. And yeah, I think the Arsenal game, even if the one thing I don't want is, and actually the one element of this that I'm a little bit concerned about is if we do go through that opening quartet of games with Neil Pla Eurovision style, right, then you want Burnley rather than Watford, because Watford's a team where we obviously came up with them and you're thinking, right, you're then looking at that and thinking you kind of probably need to take the 3 points just to get that jolt of momentum to get us kick started. But if we can take anything from the opening 3 games and then hopefully something from the 4th, then I'll look at it and I'm quite confident about Norwich's chances. Just back to that Liverpool game though. You mentioned sort of a few performances gave you encouragement. Of the new players in particular, which were you most encouraged by?
Well, I think Rashica, he caused some problems. Totally understandable that he ran out of puff a little bit. I think there are a couple. He got himself into some good situations, and I spoke to Ben Gibson yesterday, and we're doing interview in the paper Saturday, and he pointed out that there was a couple of moments that in 3 or 4 weeks' time he'd have known where Pukki was going to go, so he didn't quite read that. So that will that will happen. I thought obviously a lot of Norwich fans quite rightly raved about Journalistic. I thought going forward he was absolutely brilliant and proved that if Norwich do decide to play with a back 3, which I'd like them to try, I think he'd be an outstanding player. Defensively, as you'd expect against a team like Liverpool, there was 1 or 2 headers and a few occasions he got caught out. You could argue wasn't always being helped by Rashica. Cantwell probably supported him a bit better when there was that change. But look, I think throughout the team it was okay. It was okay. Could have been a lot worse. And comparing to 2 years ago when they lost at Anfield, and I know Norwich did have praise for having a go. I've come away from this game feeling a bit more confident than I did when I went to the Anfield match.
I am the same. I think at that point there was the kind of romanticism of the season that we just had, and 18-19 is up there in the pantheon of greatest Norwich City seasons, because it was the way that we played and the amount of late comebacks and the amount of crazy games that there were. And I described it, I think, on Michael Bailey's On the Ball pod as a swashbuckling orchestra, right? Because, which sounds like 2 things that don't go together, a complete misnomer. But I think that it was that sort of going at it, and the swashbuckling element is the just having a right good go. And then the orchestral element was the intricate technical football that we were playing. But that just did not translate at all in terms of coming up to the Premier League and trying to impose that same identity on teams that are just much better at it. And to be honest, pound for pound, a lot better than we are in terms of quality of player. So And the squad is better this time as well, I would say. But the key thing for me that has happened in the summer is this switch to 4-3-3, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be predominantly hitting teams on the break, and up that top end of the field is where we've done the heavy lifting so far in terms of transfers. I'm sure you're well aware, and I know that definitely a number 6, a centre back probably, and a left back, which looks likely to be Brandon Williams in terms of cover, are still to come in. But the heavy lifting's been up the top end of the field. And after the game, Daniel Farke, at the Liverpool game this is, at the start of this season, Daniel Farke said, it might sound a bit strange because we've just been beaten 3-0 at home, but I'm actually a lot more encouraged after watching that game. And you know what? I didn't think that was just a manager coming out with the right soundbite. I actually totally agreed with that assessment, because I looked at it and I thought, the system that we're going to play, we're going to hurt teams this season. We're going to hurt teams at the top end of the pitch. We're not going to be doing that thing where we're passing it around the box and not actually penetrating through their defensive line. Because we're playing a different type of system this year, we're going to be able to get in behind teams. And that, for me, is the big change. And it's just going to come down to, I think, the productivity of the players in the final third. If we have players that are productive in that final third, they're taking chances, creating chances, then I actually think we're going to be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I still felt 2 years ago the team was good enough, that had enough quality, albeit inexperienced, to stay up. I mean, I know you shouldn't compare, but you do. But the Paul Lambert team that got promotion 2011 was a mixture of Championship and League One players.
Yeah, absolutely it was.
And they had no right to be there, but that they had that mentality, and even they were similarly open at the back. But I felt that 2 years ago, with the right signings, I know Stuart Webber said they sent Daniel to war without a gun. And the signings didn't quite work. I felt Norwich's wage bill still wasn't the lowest that season, by the way. It was Sheffield United's. So they did pay a bit still. But I think the tactics, and obviously the pushing the fullbacks up too much. I think with the right tactics and only 1 or 2 signings that have worked, I think Norwich could have stayed up. I don't think they're as bad as obviously losing your final 10 games is very bad. But I think before that, I still think they had a chance. I think now the signings look good. Daniel has proven in his 4 years that even from mistakes he's made, going right back to, obviously, he was a young manager when he came to Norwich, and I think we're all slightly critical of some of the things that happened right at the start. I'm going right back to the opening game against Fulham when Oliveira disgraced himself, and the fact that he wasn't punished even when he was playing up in the dressing room days after that. Should never have kicked a ball again for the club. And I think Daniel has proven the one thing he has done, he's always learnt from his mistakes, and he's changed. And that's why I think he will go on to bigger and better things eventually.
No question.
And that is why I think he'll get Norwich sorted this season. I think his tactics, bringing in the players that Stuart Webber's helped him with, and maybe 1 or 2 others, it will work. They'll be stronger, and I don't see Norwich going down.
No, I'm totally with you. Just on the point of the Lambert team, that sort of team, which I did say at the time, this is a squad of Championship and League One players, and it's good to hear you say that, because that kind of vindicates what I was thinking then. Do you think a team, now Sheffield United you might point to here, but do you think a team with that same sort of makeup in terms of quality could succeed in the Premier League now?
Well, I think so, because the one thing I'd say is, and the disappointing thing is, I know it's different times, but I actually don't think the Premier League, quality-wise, in the last 2 or 3 years is that good, and that's why I thought Norwich would have been able to stay up
at the top end.
At the top end, yes, of course, but I mean the bottom half, and when they went down 2 years ago, I thought Norwich could stay up because the bottom 6 was so poor, and that was what was so disappointing. Last season as well, the bottom 5 or 6, they weren't great, and that's why I think, I know occasionally we've had not Norwich and West Brom and Fulham bounce around a lot, but invariably, looking at the other teams like Swansea and Palace, Sheffield United for one season, teams have been able to go up and stay up. So that is why I don't think we should kid ourselves. And while the top teams are very, very good, I think it's more than possible to stay up, because I just don't think the Premier League's quite as good as what the TV companies keep telling us.
Yes, that product that they're flogging for
Yeah.
ridiculous sums of money. Now, just in terms of it not being that good at the bottom end of the table, I've been having this discussion with a few people, and what I'm trying to identify is the teams that I think can finish below Norwich City. Because, do you know, that way I've calibrated where I think we are going to be quality-wise, and I think 15, 16 is where I'm at, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Now, well, there's a bit of hope in there as well, but it's not the blind optimism a couple of years ago. It's and sort of coloured by the season that had just gone. I actually think we've made the right kinds of changes in terms of personnel, in terms of system that I was alluding to a few moments back. But I'm looking at it now and I'm thinking, right, that's where I think we are in terms of where I think we're pegged. But now I'm saying, right, who are the teams that can finish below us? So at the moment, the ones that I've identified that I'm quite confident about are Brentford, despite the win against Arsenal. I think they might finish below us. Crystal Palace, if they don't change their manager quickly enough, because Vieira's just franked the board all over again. Another appointment that they, I mean, stylistically might be a bit different, but I think, again, they're going to be a team that just hemorrhages goals rather than being the workman-like outfit that's going to be obdurate and hard for teams to break down at times. So I think Palace might finish below us. Other than that, there's nobody that I'm that confident pointing to yet where I think they're definitely a candidate to finish below us. There are a few that could be, but none that I'm sure of. So no, I don't know if my signal went slightly there.
Yeah, I think Brentford, great result, and it's a great story, and I'm glad they're in the Premier League, and it's good for football that they've got. I think they'll go down. Just all round squad. Looking at them last season, they've got the season off to a flyer. I think Watford will be down there again, even though they've obviously got couple of really quality players.
Yeah.
Then I agree with Palace, but then you're looking, but there'll be, I think there'll be one or two teams, maybe just one that really struggles, be it with a new manager. You can't be sure with Wolves, and they're because it's a totally different style of play they're looking to bring in. It might not work, and then you've got Southampton and you've got Brighton. I think Newcastle will be the normal soap opera without them never ever really threatening to go down. Steve Bruce won't let them. So I think there's enough there to have a go at. It's still not going to be easy. It's going to be very difficult. But I think the Premier League will deliver a couple of basket cases for Norwich to hopefully finish above.
That's what I'm hoping, mate. But at the moment, I've not identified who said the basket cases necessarily are yet. But that's a long old season, marathon, not a sprint, and all that. Now, going to come on to the kind of meat of what I want to talk to you about. So, again, this is an interesting conversation because even though you're far greater accredited journalist than I, easy for me to say, I know what it's like, and I've sort of done it for a decade now, and I know what it's like when you're covering your own club. Now, and it's an interesting balance, and it's a balancing act, really, because journalistically, you find out stuff, and there's the vast majority of stuff that you do find out, you can't print because you either can't stand it up, you're not sure about it, whatever. And there's also that trust that you need to build with people, because you build relationships of trust where they share stuff, and you don't automatically because people have this impression that journalists, you hear something and it's like, okay, stop the presses, we're going to run that. And it's nothing like that. It's more like you hear quite a lot of information, you try and sift through that, find what the truth actually is from speaking to a variety of people rather than just one, and then you decide to report what you think is in the public interest to report, but also it's about leveraging those relationships, but not trampling upon them just to get the next big story. So that balancing act becomes even more delicate when you're covering your own club, because, and what happens is it becomes not just your head that's involved, but your heart as well. And that's just a natural human reaction, isn't it? So what's that like for you? Because you're operating at the kind of top end of the Fleet Street press. So What's that like for you when you're talking and writing about Norwich City?
Well, it's a balancing act, and I have real sympathy for colleagues that may, let's say, covering Celtic Rangers, the guys that do that on a daily basis. It's a very, very difficult job. Yeah, I've got friends who are Liverpool fans, and obviously they cover Liverpool and Everton and pals in London. It's a bit different if you're doing Norwich and the national press, because I probably don't write about them as much as those guys on a daily basis. But you still have a decision to make. Of course, you work for the Sun, particularly social media now. Well, obviously, I say the vast majority of social media hates us, and you have to accept that and deal with that. So, and of course, they think that every time you write a story, it's there. You've done it for clicks. And you're making it up, and you just decided to do it. Well, of course, I've been at the Sun 25 years ago this month. If you just wrote everything you knew, or if you weren't sure, you didn't check it out, you'd have no one talk to you. And of course, it's not like being a news reporter, because if you were a news reporter for particularly a national paper, you can write stuff about people and you might not see them again. Whereas in football now, I'm dealing with obviously you've got the people in the comms officers that you deal with. Maybe they go to different clubs and you speak, and of course you sometimes you need their help for for an interview and to talk to people. Managers that maybe what I knew as a player, now they're now sort of same age as me or younger, and then those players are now managers, or those players may now be agents. I'm finding that more now, the last 3 or 4 years. So you have to have relationships with people, otherwise no one's going to talk to you again. So of course, if we just write what we feel online and things that might seem odd, I'm not saying we're right all the time, because that's impossible. It doesn't matter who you work for, and then sometimes you think what you think's right, and I mean, the most difficult one is transfers, I find, and that's why, sometimes now I think you're writing about transfers later on than you used to, because now a club, and Norwich will be the same now. They're looking for another central defender, which they are, aren't they? I imagine it'd be remiss of them. I know they've missed out on 1 or 2 targets. They'd still be going for 3 or 4 players. So we could write the story that Norwich are in for this, and they're all probably right, and they're probably talking to. But so now I think you find that we're leaving the transfer stories a little bit later for them to actually, rather than just they're interested in this player, so I can see why people look at that, and that didn't happen. And
is that a trust thing, by the way? Why do you think these things are getting reported later? Is that a concerted?
Well, I think I don't think clubs used to have as many targets for one position as they used to, and it doesn't sound as though I'm making excuses, and I accept that. But now the Buendia one was interesting. That we were hearing stuff, and I don't know, with stories last year about various clubs being interested in him. I don't think anyone made any major offers, or they didn't. I think Sheffield United showed a little bit of interest, but literally it was only we left until quite late on, when we knew Villa and Arsenal were actually making bids for him, that we started running the story, and equally Gilmore with Chelsea. So we'll probably leave it a bit later now, because there are so many twists and turns. But in terms of covering your club, you have to make a judgment call. You do speak to people that used to be involved with the club, and maybe that some are, and that they're. I think I'd like to think I've got a good relationship with Norwich. I'm sure there'll be occasions in the past we've pissed them off a bit, but I think you've always got to be fair, and equally, if it is a story, I'm just trying to think of one that Alex Neil was given a new contract despite having got relegated a few years ago. I think when they had a difficult start, and I think Ed Balls at the time sort of said, no, that's not true, or something. A story like that we'd have only written once we'd have run it past the club, put it that way. Something like that. You have to stick on the club, even if they don't comment. So otherwise, they just never deal with you ever again. So I think sometimes supporters have to bear that in mind. There'll be other stories that would just maybe cause you so much hassle, even if they're good stories. I think.
Is this pertaining to more sort of off-field extra?
Yeah. So you know, and maybe if it was an England player, or you might do it or you might not. But you know, we hear stuff that we can't necessarily prove, or even if we can. I know Norwich, when they were in the last Premier League under around the Chris Hughton time, we were hearing a couple of things of players having women appear at the hotel rooms, away games, and that sort of stuff. I think that particularly a sort of a very expensive Dutch striker that then may have been dropped, and so you're hearing bits and pieces.
Scoring off the field, if not on it.
Exactly. It's just something. It's just not worth it. It goes on at other clubs, and sometimes I know when it's Olivier Giroud, that appears at the front of the paper. So sometimes as so there is a difference between a football reporter and a news reporter, and I don't think players understandably always see the difference between what goes on at a national paper at the front or at the back. But there is a difference, and I certainly think clubs and managers realise that. But I think players who obviously have got a deep mistrust of the press, not all, but obviously some, as fans have as well. Let's be honest about it.
Folk love us, mate. Folk love us. Now, just a couple of interesting questions emerged from that. So one is, at what point if it's a sports news story, so something that's front page news, but pertaining to a back page protagonist, at what point in the editorial decision making process do you decide, right, we're going to put a news reporter on this or a sports reporter? So that's question one, and I'm going to roll these together because it feels like you'd be better talking about both at the same time. And the second one is just based on the gravitas of the player. So you mentioned Giroud as an example, right? So Olivier Giroud is doing something that's sort of front page news. You would run it because of the stature of the player, right? Or if it's an England international, you wouldn't necessarily run it about Norwich players. But what level of player, or what are the factors that are considered when you go, right, do we really want to run this potential front page story? How does that whole decision making process work between the news team, the sports team, and whether you run something or not? Talk us through that kind of situation.
I mean, invariably, if we get a call from the news desk about someone like Olivier Giroud, we just then just basically give them the Arsenal press officer's telephone number and go, here we go. You can carry on with that one. And then not Norwich. You'd have to make the judgment call yourself, really. And obviously, so what goes on in people's private lives is a little bit different. Obviously, it's then different when it comes to an actual situation where it's involves and being dropped from the team, and that sort of stuff. Or so sometimes you may have heard about it 3 or 4 days, or even a week or 2 weeks too late. So it's just really not worth it. And for 5 paragraphs in the paper, the upset it will cause. So it's not worth doing. So you do have to make an issue. Sometimes it's obviously things quite rightly legally you can't do. So for example, a recent example is it was known that Aubameyang and Lacazette had within sort of journalistic circles that they both had COVID. Which is why they didn't play against Brentford. Arsenal released a statement yesterday, and it's interesting. Obviously, journalists, you can't write that. You can't write that they've got COVID without specifically those people's permission. I mean, people on Twitter obviously just write anything, don't they? But it was interesting that around the weekend, people were there's the normal bullshit that those two had a fight, and it was really getting some momentum. Because they were just putting 2 and 2 together. But, you just can't, even though we knew that wasn't true, you obviously can't say that they've got COVID. And at one stage, Arsenal last Friday afternoon thought the game was going to have to be called off against Brentford. That's an issue, but there's different. So there's legal issues as well. And while again, you know, you work for a red top and you put stuff on Twitter, and people obviously say, you know, you've lied and you've made it up. You know, there is, particularly if you work for a paper, you know, there is the law, and you know, newspapers, clubs can be quite litigious, and quite rightly, if you've written stuff that's you know, totally wrong. Equally, with some, you know, it seems to be different rules in Twitter, doesn't it, Stuart? You know,
I remember talking to my media law lecturer about this, Paul Gubbins, God rest him, by the way, absolute legend of Staffordshire University's journalism department. But me and him were talking, and what he said was that the rules of engagement have completely... Now, I was doing my degree between 2009 and 2012, so that's a wee while ago now. But he was saying then that the rules of engagement have completely changed. And I'd be interested to know what you think in terms of how that has influenced reporting. So do you think it's actually gone kind of sort of inversely? It's kind of made journalists actually maybe be a bit safer rather than... And I don't just mean on social media, I mean in terms of the actual reporting of the stories, because of all of the misinformation, because of how quickly, as you just sort of exemplified there, something can blow up that is absolute bollocks.
It's different. Yeah, I mean, you still have to apply the same rules and be careful. But it's interesting when I joined. So when I started at the Sun, you'd get story tips either by people just speaking to people, or you'd get people ringing the office and you'd get someone with a tip. And it's funny, the amount of stories, a lot of the time it'd be bullshit, but sometimes the ones that you think aren't true often are. And it's amazing how many black taxi drivers, those they're not ringing in for money, they just say, oh, I've heard this, and they got, you know, they're in a quiet spot in a lay-by somewhere, and I'll tell you what, I'll ring the newspaper with it. And invariably the black cab tips with you know, I've just had so and so, and I've dropped him off at Tottenham's training ground, and you know, that sort of thing. But now, of course, it's changed. And then they maybe when it changed, or we didn't even have emails at the Sun in 1996, believe it or not. And Sun Online, Sun Sport only had one internet terminal as well.
Madness, isn't it, to think back?
I know. And then people started emailing stories, and now, to be honest, people just put it on Twitter, don't they? They want ownership. If it's true, they want ownership of this story, which is, you know, fair enough. They want to be that person that gets it out there. Equally, it's the other nonsense, the really dangerous nonsense, and obviously the online abuse and stuff like that, which I think it's, you know, difficult to. It's virtually impossible to police, isn't it? Despite the efforts of the social media companies, which is obviously not necessarily good enough.
Did you have a view? Just, we're talking about abuse. Did you have I mean, I'm sure you're going to condemn it, but in terms of the chanting that was directed to Billy Gilmore, I think what I would like to say is, I think the restorative and redressive steps that Liverpool took in the midst of that, doing the sit down with Klopp, all of that kind of stuff. Fair play to Liverpool for coming out, talking about it, admitting that it happened, and saying, look, this needs to be dealt with. If there's a problem in our fan base, we're going to tackle it. Fair play to Liverpool.
Yeah, fair play to Jurgen Klopp. That's sort of in contrast to, you know, Gary Rowett's comments, not really criticising the Millwall supporters for the booing of the knee the other night. It's a total contrast, isn't it? So, you know, fair play to Klopp. Well done, Liverpool. Well done, the supporters group at Liverpool weren't afraid to dig their own fans out. I mean, I didn't hear it. I'd be interested to know how many supporters in sort of the lower Barclay heard it, or obviously the South Stand as well. But where we were, I didn't know about it until it was on agency Saturday night, when once the club had criticised the supporters. So I haven't heard it. It's obviously a chant that's been sung for years, and hopefully now, it doesn't make it right, by the way, and hopefully now Klopp's comments will put an end to this sort of embarrassing behaviour.
We'll see when Liverpool play Chelsea, because that's going to be the key, isn't it? Now, in terms of the other side of it, just I noticed that the Liverpool Echoes man was tweeting about the Norwich fans doing the sign-on chant. to the Liverpool supporters. Do you think that's where do you think the kind of line comes between the differences there?
Well, I mean, that every club again doesn't make it right, but I mean that's just knockabout behaviour, isn't it? I think there's I think there's a difference there, and let's be honest, Norwich fans, with various songs have had a bit coming up, our way as well. I mean, in younger than that, but particularly in the late '80s, fans used to just make sheep noises at us. And and stuff like that, which is moved on a bit, but that was quite common.
I'm sorry, I find that really funny. I never knew that. I've just got this weird image in my head of it going bah.
They did, and we didn't leave there raging, and now there's the chant, your sister is your brother, and all this sort of stuff. I don't think there's any Norwich fans who just think that's a bit rubbish. And not very, very original, but that's so. I think you've got to be, to a degree, grown up about stuff as well. Obviously, you're then talking, from that, the homophobic stuff, which is obviously Chelsea, and then you take it up to the crap involving Munich, Man United fans, obviously Liverpool. Hillsborough, and then it's not just England that's got the problem. Italy. You've got the Torino supporters who there's songs about their team that in the Supergar, the team that crashed into a mountain. You've obviously got Juventus supporters have a lot of stuff about Heysel sung at them. So it's. I hope that we are moving away from that, but equally the sign on thing. For a start, Norwich aren't the only fans. I do a lot of Liverpool away games. I would say the vast majority do that. And I know some Liverpool journalists have got very defensive, and I know some have then gone to, I think Brian Reid at the Mirror a few times has then, put out the statistics of the current jobless in that specific club to Liverpool. And it's just like, but whatever.
I mean, like the jobless statistics. It was something when I was doing local radio reporting. We used to get them monthly. We'd get like how many people were signing on or not signing on and stuff like that. I mean, to be honest, I think it's a moot debate. My main view on that was that if Ian Doyle at the Echo is tweeting about that when a Norwich City footballer has been subjected to homophobic chanting from the Liverpool fans, that feels like a complete diversion of attention that should not have happened. So I would be critical of that, unless he wasn't aware of that.
If he was that during the game he did that? Sorry.
So it was after the game. He was tweeting it, and he was like, so the Norwich fans were chanting "sign on," and I'm thinking, right, hang on a minute. Like in terms of the gravity of chanting misdemeanor, that's lower down the pecking order. Yeah. So and fair play to Liverpool as a safe for coming out and tackling it the way they did. But anyway, I'm going to move it on a wee bit to. So we've spoken about like personal experience, what it's like covering your club in the media. But the media have peed me off this week, Charlie, because I have been looking at so many pre-season or sort of start of season predictions for Norwich City, and the level of analysis goes thus: they've sold their best player. We haven't really looked at who they've bought. They're going to go down, and they're going to probably finish bottom or bottom two. That's the sum total of analysis from the vast majority of outlets about Norwich City this season. That's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing they've sold Buendia, so they're going to go down. Simple, right? Not looking at the very, very creative approach we've taken to transfers, where we're signing one of the top talents, one of the top 50, and in some people's lists, the top 20 young talents across Europe in Christos Cholis. We've signed a really, really experienced and handy Ligue 1 player for a very, very good value fee in Pierre-Les Malou, adding some much-needed experience to the team. We've made permanent the signings of Dimitris Giannoulis, Mr. No Breaks, and Ben Gibson, who struck up a historically successful partnership with Grant Hanley at the back in the Championship last season. We've got Milot Rashica, who, before he sort of started casting his eyes elsewhere for a move, was on fire in the Bundesliga for Werder Bremen. We've brought in another player from that team, and likewise with Cholis coming in, you've now got two coming from PAOK, and these relationships are really important in terms of players bedding into a new culture, a new country, a new club. So there's a whole Billy Gilmour coming from Chelsea, who emerged as probably the most coveted of the gettable young British talents that you could have got on loan from a big Premier League team after the Euros. So that whole smorgasbord of stuff, and people are like, they've sold Buendia, so they're going to finish bottom. It's really annoyed me, mate. How do you feel about it?
Yeah,
do you think it's lazy journalism?
Well, I think, look, there's two things here. Look, first of all, you can't blame people for thinking Norwich might go down, in that of the last 7 years in the Premier League, they've gone down in 5 of them.
That's not what I'm annoyed about.
No, and so same with, obviously, West Brom as well. Now, I think they're wrong, for a start. So I do think they're wrong.
Me too.
And I think they're probably just taking a half guess. Equally, we're into the realms of dream team marks now. Is that what happens is, and we mention that in a minute, but and we've all been there, that suddenly they get an email and say, right, we want your top 4 in the year 3 relegated, and they'll have a quick think and they go, right, bosh, right, go down, we'll do that, and they'll just think, they went down 2 years ago, and then it's subjective, and some of them won't know what's happened inside the club. Some will think, well, some might know the details of who they've signed. They might still think that they'll go down, but I do think they're wrong. But equally, again, there's one thing: we don't have to do that anymore at the Sun now. We've got a separate company that do it. But there's one thing that the amount of stick. If there's one thing over the past 2 decades that we can write about footballers and write about them during games, the one thing, of course, they'd look at is the marks out of 10. And there's nothing that, and sometimes you'll be watching a game and you're thinking, right, okay, there's 26 players. So now it's obviously, it can be more. And you're thinking, well, I don't remember what did their left back play like? You're probably thinking, well, I'll probably better give them a 6. And of course, it might, and it's not being lazy. It's just like you're marking 26 people, and sometimes we've all done it. There's no excuse for getting the man of the match, giving him a 4. It's the one thing you ask any footballer. Maybe not so much now because footballers don't read newspapers, but not younger ones, and they just don't. But they might be aware of their marks. But there's one thing: the amount of stick. And the issues it caused. And I've got, and I've gone off at a bit of a tangent, but footballers I know, quite a few of them have admitted to me that they've seen individual careers at a club nosedive and go in a different path because they were looking at the marks out of 10. That's a real common thing. I mean, once I remember, Vinnie Jones. He when he was at Wimbledon, he once our reporter Vicky Orvice, who sadly he's passed away now, and Vicky used to laugh about the story. She once went up to the training ground and she got told to F off by Jones, because those days you could just walk to the training ground, because he was 7 and not 6 out of 10. And it was a real issue for him. And when he was on Celebrity Big Brother, I remember telling the missus, who is Italian and wasn't knows of football, but wasn't aware of a Wimbledon midfielder, Leeds or whatever. And it was by absolute coincidence that one moment he told the other people in the show that if there was one thing in his whole career that used to wind him up, and he was shaking with rage, was that if he got 6 out of 10 and he should have been a 7 or out of 8. And so for him, having a great career, probably overachieved, and ended up in Hollywood because of it. It's a real issue. And it used to be for Robbie Savage as well. Robbie Savage had got it into his head that the London journalists at the Sun deliberately marked him down, and he once communicated to our Midlands reporter that you've got to tell the London lot for not giving me shit marks, which is utterly bizarre. We really weren't targeting Robbie Savage, but so sometimes. The point being, predictions in the paper sometimes can be more hassle than it's worth.
No, do you know what? I think you make an interesting point. However, I think if outlets are if they are going to be committing to doing these, actually, do you know what? I'm going to pick up on the player ratings first because I thought you made some really interesting points on the player ratings. Right, I think there's there's no journalistic resource really poured into it, which is what you've kind of just admitted. And it was the same. Like if a journalist out doing a game at any of the papers that I've worked for,
we're paying for a company, a separate company that it's all done in the office. Then it's whether it's right or wrong, but
that's fine. That's fine. That's a departure because the papers that I was working for, it was like they basically did their match report and then it was, oh right, I've got to do the ratings as well. Now, interestingly, I ended up in the Rangers press box for a pre-season friendly against Wigan, right? And they were like, oh, we'll pay you 30 quid if you do some ratings for us, right? Which is not a great deal of money, but I thought, all right, okay, it gives me something to do. And do you know what, mate? It was like the best crafted player ratings ever. I didn't go too extensive in the paragraphs. Everything was one paragraph, right? But maybe 2 or 3 sentences of insightful comment in their performance. And I got like a note back saying, those are the best player ratings that we have ever read. And it was just because I was able to actually allocate my time specifically to that one task. And it was amazing the difference rather than composed but effective, like sort of short blurb about kind of generalities of the thing. So I think that's an interesting point you make. However, on the predictions thing, that I don't think that's the same because it's not that's something where you're taking a holistic view and you're actually pausing for thought.
Yeah.
So I don't think they're necessarily comparable in that score. And I think if a company or an outlet is actually committing itself to going, do you know what? We're going to predict how people are going to finish. And I know there's loads of stories floating about and journalists are overworked. I mean, I've done the job. I know that. But if you're going to allocate time to doing something, then at least have a look at who they've brought in and who's gone out. And even if you've not heard of some of the Germans, do a wee bit of reading on them. You know, are players coming for Germany? Are players coming for Greece? You know, and like making it as simplistic as, oh, they've sold Buendia, they're going to be crap. I just think it strikes of a lot of the pressures affecting the industry and it's affecting the quality output. Because if that's the quality of analysis, if you say they've gone for some interesting transfers, I don't think they'll come off. Yeah. And that's why they'll finish bottom 2. I accept that. If you're going to say they've sold Buendia, so they're going to finish bottom 2, ignoring how busy we've been in the transfer market, it's nonsense.
I agree. The other problem is, even if you sometimes do think about it, it probably tells you more about my judgment than anything. But I remember in what would have been 2015, we had to give our predictions at the start of the season, and I put something on Twitter, and obviously wish I hadn't, but I was never going to delete it because I think that's gutless. But I had one of the predictions for the team was that they'd struggle. They'd get relegated because they appointed a manager and it wouldn't work and they'd go down. Unfortunately, that team was Leicester City and they won the Premier League. And it wasn't like I just thought I thought Ranieri was a bad appointment. He was a mercenary. Obviously, where he's gone since has not quite worked. Unfortunately, he engineered the greatest Premier League story ever, and I had them going down. So.
Well, mate, good on you for keeping that up. I've kept some tweets up that are very much skeletons in my closet as well, because I just think, I mean, like, you live and die by the courage of your convictions, you know what I mean, whether you're right or wrong. So I'm with you on that score. James Henderson is, he says, you can't get bent out of shape about the predictions. Your points about signings are valid, but it doesn't mean we won't miss Emi Buendia's creativity. And look at history, good shout, we will go down. I think that's a fair enough perspective. Yeah. But I think now's the time to at least try and maintain some positivity. Just on the start of the season, we were kind of alluding to this earlier. At what point do you think the pressure cooker gets sort of ratcheted up to the point that it might affect performances? Because it's a simple thing, pressure, right? If Emi Buendia, if Teemu Pukki's running through and he's got a chance, right? And Norwich City have started the season with a win and a draw, say, right? Then you go into that third game, Teemu Pukki's running through, and he's got nothing to lose. He's got everything to gain, right? If he's running through in the Watford game and we've still got no points on the board, then the pressure's on him to try and put that chance away. So I'm not saying that the pressure's not there anyway. It's not that it's non-existent, but it's different depending on the circumstances heading into the game. And I'm using Pukki just as one example. But at what point do you think the pressure cooker gets ratcheted up? Because we have got this difficult start to the season, but if we go through 5 games, including the Watford game, and we've still got no points at that point, surely that's the stage where Norwich City are beginning to play catch up and it gets troublesome, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's probably more pressure on Daniel Farke than there is the players, because particularly the players that have come in, they know that they're going to be afforded time to try and fit into the Premier League. They deserve time. They will need time. Pukki's proven that he can score goals. Obviously, 2 years ago, it was a mixture of, I think, broke his toe or something? Was it at Leicester? And I know not a great deal was made about it, but that's never going to help a striker in that situation. Then he suffered a loss of confidence, but that was not helped by the team that, quite frankly, were just not good enough in the final third. And I think because Daniel Farke was there for that, I think the pressure might hit him quicker than it would do players who are like, well, yeah, what happened to go 2 years ago doesn't make any difference to me because I've only been here for a few weeks. So, and then you've got the experience of players like Tim Krul, which will help, and obviously Gibson and Hanley that have been through tough times. So I think there is pressure on the manager, not now, but I think if we get to November, December, and they'll obviously stick with him anyway, as they've proven before, and I'm sure they will. But there's probably more pressure on Daniel than the actual team, I think, anyway.
Even though Stuart Webber's basically alluded to the fact he's got a job for life.
Norwich. I don't say that there's pressure that he's going to get the sack. I just think there's just pressure on him as a manager to maybe start making the changes and stuff, which he might necessarily not need to be doing, because it's a difficult one, isn't it? You've got a player who's come from Werder Bremen. And say he's not playing well. Hopefully that won't be right. But you think, well, he needs to be given time, but maybe I should give him a rest. So there's pressure on the manager to make those sort of decisions. Whereas obviously the player might be playing, struggling, but we think, well, just give me time. So I think they're two slightly different things.
Fair enough. No, I appreciate where you're coming from then. In terms of the summer signings, who are you most excited about? I asked in reference to the Liverpool game, but I'm talking more generally of everyone we've signed. Is there anyone that you're really excited to see?
Well, Gilmour, he's obviously going to be a star, isn't he? Norwich have done exceptionally well to get him. You're looking at. I think obviously Rashica has had interest from big clubs in the past. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much interest was shown in him now. Obviously, a bit. He is a. He's going to be a talent, and if you're signing another player from Werder Bremen, bloke that captained Nice for half of last season, you've got some good players there. Obviously, another player from Greece and Zolis as well. So, but I'd say Gilmour, because he's the one player that I imagine teams who would be going for in and around Europe would want. So I'm thinking, someone like, well, not necessarily West Ham, because they're probably all right in that area, but maybe. But you've got teams that will be pushing for 6th, 7th, 8th that would want Gilmour in their team. So that's why I think it's such a great coup, and terrific that Norwich now have this relationship with Chelsea and their manager, of course, through Daniel Farke and Thomas Tuchel, and maybe this time next year they'll still be in the Premier League and we'll get another Chelsea player. But equally, talking about Buendia, I think people outside Norwich, and I think particularly Norwich fans, have to accept the fact that Buendia has gone now. If they do stay in the Premier League, Norwich will do, and they will have to sell Campbell or Max Aarons. And I think that is the only way this club progresses, if it makes any sense, is by selling their best player or one of their best players every year. Doesn't sound ideal, but just look at Southampton. If Southampton, I think, are the not only have they stayed in the Premier League, but just look who they've sold. Just from Mane to Van Dijk to Lovren to Lallana to Schneiderlin, let alone all the homegrown players like Ox, and obviously going back to Bale and Walcott and Luke Shaw. It's incredible that they're bringing players through, but also making clever signings. And I think
Armstrong's good value at that fee. Armstrong's good value at that fee, I think. Yeah. And I like Southampton. I like the way they go about it, but I do think, a bit like Norwich City, eventually they might sell the wrong player, not replace them right, and fall back out of the league again. But they're always going to be challenging to get back in it. And what's quite encouraging about Norwich City is that we now seem to be in that bracket of teams who, once we fall out, we're not sort of falling back down into obscurity. We do seem to be immediately ready to challenge to come back up again. And I don't necessarily think that's just tied down to the manager or even Stuart Webber. I just think the setup at the football club and more the structure and the methodology of the thinking is such now that it's modern. And I think Norwich City have kind of moved up a little bit in that score. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. But I also think, and you're right, everything you say there. And I think the one group of people, particularly with what happened at the end of 2 years ago, or 18 months ago when they got relegated, you have to praise the supporters. And I think the supporters have helped make an easy decision for the board to stick with Daniel. And because the club knew they've got the supporters' support, they knew that at no stage were the majority of sensible fans interested in making a change despite a terrible end to the season. I don't think this would have been the same at other clubs. And
absolutely not.
They would have got on the players' backs. And I know people think, Norwich fans, you've got obviously idiots on Twitter, but not Norwich. The supporters at the ground. I think they give a bit of. I don't like the stick they give to some of the homegrown players in the past. Obviously, count on now, but generally they're a very, very sensible bunch. And even last season, 18 months ago, they saw what was going on. There was no desire for not really. There was no Canary call again. Apart from the small minority, there was not that feeling. So the board knew there was no desire from the supporters to make the change. So all of a sudden, it makes their job easier, doesn't it? Whereas other clubs, they're looking at it thinking, well, yeah, we want to keep him, but we've got 70% of them want them out, this manager out, and now they're all hitting the phones and they're on TV, and so I think the board were helped by the fans being pretty sensible, normal, realistic, and that everyone's been rewarded for remaining sane and having belief in the manager. Now let's hope they can now build and be better than that last season.
Yeah, but I'm confident they will be, and I totally agree with what you said about Billy Gilmore. I think as well, another factor in what we've said about Norwich City moving up that wee bit is looking at the likes of Ollie Skip going and now being a starter, or at least in the first team picture at Spurs. It's yet another example of a talent coming down from one of the higher echelon Premier League clubs, coming down to Norwich City, getting a great grounding and playing football the right way, and then going back into the top division, ready to actually influence things in a better way. And that can only be good for our football club. And if we fall out of the Premier League, one of the wee benefits of it is we can get more of those players in on loan rather than it being capped. So I think that is a real positive. And there's so much to be happy about in terms of the direction of the football club at the moment. And obviously, if Stuart Webber, Daniel Farke move on, it's about getting the succession right. But I just have a feeling that, and what I love about it as well is, everybody always thought, oh, sleepy old Norfolk, sleepy old Norwich. We've actually gone out and we've been one of the most forward-thinking clubs in the country when it comes to how we go about stuff. And I'm quite proud of that as a Norwich fan.
Yeah, and they've got this, what is it, this £750,000, is it the football bot? I don't think it's called that, but this thing that the training ground that some of the Dortmund and a few of the other clubs have got, the first English club to have that. I think the one thing that you want, and it's generally not possible, is to create some sort of legacy. I know it's used quite a lot. And I think they are now. And the reason being is that when you're looking at for a start, youngsters can see a pathway, even if they're not from Norfolk, they want to join Norwich. And that's why they had to sell Emi Wendia to prove that there is the pathway to progress, of course. But I think what's happening at the training ground and through the youth teams and the style of football, and the way the club is, even though they will still make mistakes, But and obviously as and when Stuart Webber leaves and they bring someone else in or bring someone back who's worked for the club previously, I think you can now. It's there. There's a process, and exactly the same has happened with England. And people might look at Gareth Southgate and they'll think, well, yeah, but he should have done this in the final. He should have done that.
I've made this point you're making.
He's transformed England that to something that should always be grateful that all of a sudden England players, for a start, they're not hated by fans anymore. And he's changed that perception. But the under-21s want to play for England. I remember a few years ago, the under-17 World Championships in Colombia, I think there were 55 England players who were pulled out by their clubs. You're talking about,
Wow.
This was some and Southgate was under-21s manager at the time, and they were appalled what was going on. Clubs, and I blame Alex Ferguson, who started this, and basically telling players to not play international football.
Prioritise clubs.
Few time Ryan Giggs never played a friendly for Wales, did he? But and now all of a sudden Premier League clubs have lost that power, and they want to play for their country and they want to play for England. And moving forward, when Southgate leaves, whether it's after the World Cup or after the Euros in Germany in 3 years' time, there is a clear thinking forward, and I think Norwich have got that, which not necessarily they had before. Certainly most clubs don't have that clear thinking anyway, because they're all over the shop. Because Premier League clubs, people think they're this great structured scientific business. The vast majority of clubs, they're absolute shambles. And that goes with a lot of EFL teams as well. And they basically
living manager to manager, a lot of them,
yeah.
On living or whatever the setup comes in is living basically from one power structure to another. Whereas it feels like Norwich have more of a smooth line. It's more of a line than a sort of a graph, and I think that is something that we can be proud of. You're spot on about Southgate. He basically came, and I said when he got the England job, I said if he does this right, he'll be England's Jogi Löw, and that is exactly what he's done. He's synergized everything into a pipeline going from the youth teams upwards. And he played, where he's not like Jogi Löw is he's probably got a slightly more defensive methodology tactically. Unsurprising given the type of player he was, maybe. But I think Southgate has done an amazing job at England. And see, when people were criticising him after the Croatia game, like that opened the Euros, and even at the end of the group stage, like, oh yeah, it's too defensive. I said defence wins tournaments, and it nearly did. I thought the best team in the tournament did win it in the end, but England were fantastic, and it's an unprecedented level of success for a modern England manager, and that is entirely down to the way that Gareth Southgate has essentially, he's not just been an England manager, he's been the cultural architect of the entire ecosystem from youth upwards. And I think that even more than getting to a major final is a fantastic achievement. And you're talking legacy. What a legacy to leave.
So exactly. So in a sort of a smaller version, you want that. With Norwich now and with recruiting, and it's clever recruiting, and even if they don't have the same wage bill, as we've seen before, having the money doesn't get you anywhere. It really annoys me when I hear fans complain about the board and saying, we should be spending this. They don't realise that there's lots of clubs that have spent loads more money than Norwich on players relatively when they're in the Championship, like Birmingham and Sheffield Wednesday. They've spent loads more. They've spent millions. Look at Sheffield Wednesday now. They're in League One. They've still got players on £40,000-50,000 a week. So are Birmingham. So and we saw when we're in the Premier League, Stephen Naismith, £50,000 a week, didn't have a relegation clause, extra bits and pieces, use of private jet, and lots of extra domestic flights going back to Scotland, and it cost a fortune. There were lots of signings, and it doesn't work. And you're looking, Norwich have been clever. You're looking at teams like Atalanta. Atalanta finished third in Italy for the last 3 years now. Their wage bill's not even in the top half in Italy. They're clever, being clever, clever recruitment. And we've seen that with some of the Portuguese teams from obviously South America, teams like Monaco in the past, not so much now. They've been clever. I think Southampton have been quite clever, and that's the key, isn't it? It's just putting that getting that formula to get it right. It's really difficult, but hopefully maybe they're getting it there, and we'll have a few years of getting success just by being clever. Of course, it is nice to have loads of money, but then you're looking at what Crystal Palace. Even if we had an owner that came in and gave us hundreds of millions. There's no guarantee they'd either stay up, or Crystal Palace have spent hundreds and hundreds of millions for what?
You preempted my next question.
The ground's crap, isn't it? The ground's crap. It's an embarrassment. The away end is just League Two. And, I was talking to someone involved with Palace the other day, and I was thinking of what Norwich are spending or have spent. Palace have, they've got Sacco, who's on £120,000 a week. He's gone now. Benteke and Zaha the same. So Palace, for the last 3 years, have had 3 players on £6 million a year each. Sacco got £24 million out of Palace, and he played 64 games or something in the Premier League. And, they had all these players like Cahill on 60, 70,000. I know Norwich were interested in him. They'd have paid him a lot less. But all these other McCarthy, they've got loads of players on 60, 70, 80,000 pounds. It's cost a fortune. And for what? For what? Mid-table? For what's that really achieved? They've not spent it on the infrastructure at all. And now, because of that, they're getting in another American owner or part owner to probably spend loads of money on other players that may or may not keep them up under Vieira. So I don't think that's the way forward. I think Norwich are doing it right. As nice as it would be to have a bit more money, there's no guarantee whatsoever. And Swansea were the same. They had new investment and from American owners. They're Swansea supporting chairman pretty much sold out, and look at them now.
Yeah, that's true. Although we're hoping Russ is going to do a good job.
Yeah, and I think he will.
Wishing him very well. Yeah, but it just depends, because it's a brave move from him, because obviously Cooper's football was not great, but they did well, and they probably overachieved with the squad that they had. They've lost Ayew now, who was their magic man at championship level in particular, and I think with Russell Martin, he's going in there, he's going to implement a new style. He's going to finish lower down the table, and it's just whether there's patience for that, which I hope there is. But Swansea do have in their identity, so Brendan Rodgers, Martinez, an attacking style of football and an entertaining and attractive style of football. So hopefully
he'll be Norwich manager. I think he'll be Norwich manager one day.
I think that's one of those whispers that's going around that will probably turn into truth as well. Yeah. One that I just want to throw at you before we kind of finish up, and that is total hypothetical here. But if Norwich City, if some random billion gazillionaire went, that's the club I want, that's the club for me, I'm going to buy them, would you say yes to that?
It's a difficult one. I wouldn't be keen on it. It's really depend. I mean, if it was American, for example, the investment would be there, but you'd have to accept the fact that he'd want to be making money, and there might be initial investment, but they want to be making money. Look at the moment, Liverpool have got away with it under Klopp. But for how much longer Liverpool can compete, because they've not spent. Look where Arsenal have ended up. Liverpool, if they're not careful, will end up like Arsenal. And looking at Palace, they want a return of their investment. So that's the problem. The other thing that worries me, if you get an owner in, it's got the money, but it's obviously all been written off in loans, and whether they'll pay off those loans. Obviously, Stoke are lucky because of their background. They're hundreds and hundreds of £1 million in debt, but that'll always be covered. By
the Coates family, yeah.
And then you've got, I think, and because it is Ipswich, I don't think it's probably been given enough room in the national media. But I think it's the most bizarre story that their ownership is a hedge fund, and the Ipswich are in League One spending big, spending £8,000 a week on players.
That's a ridiculous League One.
Treble the average wage. But Ipswich's money is coming from the hedge fund of the pension pots of the Arizona Fire Service. So, if you're a fireman or an ambulance worker in Arizona, would you really be wanting your pension pot being trusted in the players of Ipswich Town? I would argue I'd be very, very
no chance. Yeah. No. Fair enough, mate. That's an interesting one. Last one I'm going to throw at you, and it's from one of our listeners or watchers. David Berman's asking, have you heard any strong rumours on player signings for Norwich City?
Personally, no. I mean, they're obviously going to sign a central defender. they've got a loan player, so that potentially an English loan player. They could obviously bring some more loans from outside, and defensive central midfielder. No, they're keeping that one under wraps. We're hearing a few bits and pieces from other clubs, but I have to say, I'd be lying if I said I knew of any names other than it's come out in the press this week. There was initial interest in Gary Cahill, wasn't there? But
it's not happening anymore.
No.
Yeah, and I think a lot of countries abroad are just trying to tag Norwich City onto transfer rumours, and very quickly they seem to be getting quashed. At the moment, they seem to be keeping it. So I'm always torn. Are they keeping stuff secret? Which obviously they are to an extent, but would we have heard some sort of murmuring if something was close? I mean, Williams has been in the works a while.
Yeah.
But I think that one will happen. I think a defender will happen. And a number 6, I think there's a universal acceptance within the club and out that needs to happen. And I think for me, that's the most important one. I think if we can get that right. And the thing is, Norwich City are not going to spend a massive, exorbitant fee, which we've both talked about how that's a good thing. And I do believe that. We're not going to spend an exorbitant fee on a player that is not going to, A, provide return on investment, but B, probably not going to affect things at the top of the pitch. So I can't necessarily see us buying a number 6 that is really going to be of massive repute and of a massive fee. But it's just making sure that we get the right figure in. Tall and strong are the watchwords. So,
yeah, definitely. I'm sure they will, and they've got a bit of money, but it's all relative, isn't it? I mean, I was watching. There's a program on, I think it was Sky last night, and they did an interview with Massimo Macaroni, the old.
Butter.
And so it's a piece on him, what he's doing now. He's only just quit playing, actually. But I looked at his transfer fee, and I was thinking, the £8-9 million that Norwich are spending or have been spending. He joined Middlesbrough for £8.1 million 19 years ago.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, my God, they were relatively now, what they were spending. And you're thinking, and that's still serious money now, but oh my goodness, that was insane sums of money. What teams like Middlesbrough are spending now. So, all of a sudden makes, obviously former Middlesbrough player, but, Ben Gibbs, £8 million. Yeah, an absolute bargain, by the way. If you can keep fit, an absolute bargain. And that could be a good signing. And by the way, when I spoke to him yesterday, I remember that he was called up once by Gareth Southgate. I've forgotten actually. He got called up for a full England squad, only 2017. And I'm sure you'll remember this game, Scotland 2, England 2 at Hampton Park, where England got absolutely out of jail with that late Harry Kane goal. But then
you mean Stuart Armstrong threw Scotland to the Wolves with an errant pass. But by the way, the best element of that game for me was the fact that Lee Griffiths essentially played chicken with Joe Hart at free kicks.
Amazing, 2 great goals, weren't they? But Ben Gibbs was on the bench for that game, and the next game against France, he thought he was going to get on and make his England debut, and then France had a player sent off and went 3-1 up. So he was never going to get it. And then unfortunately he wanted to leave Middlesbrough, but they wouldn't let him go. So you're thinking, talk about fine margins, if he'd have stayed in the Premier League. But it just shows you again, and by the way, he mentioned that for the article tomorrow, how Gareth Southgate told him to come to Norwich. He still speaks to Southgate, so that was quite interesting. That Southgate has even had involvement this summer in Norwich's. It was last summer when he told him to go on loan. I apologise, but it just shows you even Gareth Southgate has a high opinion of what Norwich are doing, and has told a former player to go to the club.
That's a big endorsement for me, given we were talking about the root and branch element that he's done with England. I think that's great. Just on Gibson, and I'd be interested to know your thoughts on this, and maybe he alluded to some of it himself. I don't want you obviously to give all your story away.
No, I've basically told you the whole story already, to be honest.
No, decent. It's good line, mate. Good line. On sort of the situation with Burnley, obviously injuries played a factor, right? But I mean, Sean Dyche has been quite good at bringing the sort of defensive players and getting a lot out of them, improving some of them. I think of Tarkowski, for example, is one that he's really developed. What do you think just didn't happen?
I think the injuries didn't help, and then what the other thing is, you need your break, and then when you've got two centre halves, Tarkowski and Ben Mee play as well as they did, your chances are going to be few and far between, and then you get into your second season, get a bit frustrated, and he obviously saw that there was no pathway there. Say half the time a player needs a break at a club, don't they? And it's that one injury that they then made the most of. They got in. We've had Norwich players flourish, haven't we? And made the most of injuries in the past. Didn't happen for Ben Gibson there. In his own words, he's called it disaster. But I think he's loving playing at Norwich, loves the area. And
who doesn't, mate? Everybody that moves there stays. It's unbelievable.
They do. It's incredible, isn't it? How many former players and managers, those that grew up from as and where in England, end up staying there. Or some that move away, then move back, and it just say a lot. I think even it's all sorts of managers. I think obviously Nigel Worthington stayed in Norfolk, didn't he? And quite a few others as well. Bruce Rioch. So very, very good.
No, it's a great part of the world, mate, and I mean I love it to bits. I always say it's a bit like I'm an MP because I've got a second home. So no, excellent, Charlie. So you've got this story coming out with Ben Gibson. For anyone, I mean, I can't imagine there'll be many, but if anyone doesn't know sort of where to find you, where can they find your stuff?
Yeah, it'll definitely be in the Sun. It's funny. I'm not sure it'll be online. We're sort of similar, but we're not. So sometimes we'll put a feature on, and it doesn't always get in get online, and it infuriates us sometimes. And sometimes it's different departments. So it'll definitely be in the paper tomorrow. I remember. I did something with Neil Adams last year, and I spoke to Neil, and with the help of the club, it was really, really interesting, and it was one of those we held for a rainy day because it's quite, as you know, it's timeless, so it's not a preview to a game with Neil. Neil Adams, who probably is, he was at the time one of the first loan managers at a team, really forward thinking by the club, and now he's not only. Many other clubs have followed him. He's still seen, even by Premier League clubs, as one of the best, one of the most respected. And we actually took us ages to get it in the paper, and literally took it. Then I had to moan about the online. Look, can you get it up, please? And then when they got it up, the amount of people that read it and retweeted it was amazing. Actually,
what are the main characteristics you need to be a good loan manager?
I think you need to be patient. I think you need to listen. I think you obviously need to be a really good character because it's unique, isn't it? That it's a very interesting because a manager obviously might speak to one of other managerial friends, but they're very focused on their club, aren't they? And obviously, loan manager a bit like a sporting director, and the sporting director has to know what's going on, get well with other clubs. You can't just, you can't just think about your own club all the time, obviously. And obviously, Neil has to do that with the teams and clubs like a sporting manager, but he also has to deal with the players as well. So, that are currently, basically, they're all under orders. They have to ring in, an hour after the final whistle of every game, all these loan players. So it's a really interesting job. And he obviously, with Stuart Webber, has to make a decision in who they might bring in or where they send out. So it's obviously a really important job. And I
think for Norwich City especially, by the way, because we have so many young talents, and actually out with the first team setup, the recruitment at under 23 and under 18 level has been staggering under Stuart Webber.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, Neil came in obviously a bit before then. But let's not forget, Norwich signed James Maddison. And obviously, there are a few clubs, Liverpool, Tottenham, but we were able to have a really good look at James Maddison early on because Neil Adams was going to Coventry to watch Jacob Murphy, and so was going to games and seeing that, and obviously recommended to the club that we really needed to sign him, and they obviously Neil was found out that Sisu were pretty much cash strapped shipped, and we got him for not a lot of money. So I think Neil has been a massive success at Norwich, and again, him getting players to the right place, bringing them back, and then of course with Daniel having this amazing reputation, to be honest, for nurturing players, and players speak to each other. That's the other thing you've got to remember.
Exactly.
They're all. You've got someone like Carl Robinson, who's at Oxford. He's got a similar reputation, and in those divisions, like he'll bring you on. He's great to play for, and I think Daniel has that reputation for certainly for younger players.
He's probably a job away, but again, given the kind of methodology at play with Norwich City, maybe a decent fit as a future Norwich manager if he can have success a bit higher up, Robinson.
So, definitely, yeah. He's obviously at 602 games. He's managed. So he's only like 40. And
hold on, how are you plucking that out? Something.
Yeah. So and I think it's only Graham Taylor's got to that before him, and he's beaten Cluffy a bit. But yeah, he said I think it's ridiculous that someone like him's not getting another championship job. Absolutely ridiculous. But some of the championship appointments at the moment are utterly baffling.
Madness, mate.
Yeah,
but some of the clubs in the championship, the thing about the championship is because you're so near the promised land, right? A lot of clubs are just desperate to get there. And it's like fight tooth and nail just to do it. And that's, by the way, see, putting in context, Norwich having 2 consecutive league winning campaigns in that division, but also doing that, operating the way we do, is like really, really, really strong stuff, because there's so many teams that are just fighting tooth and nail and they'll do anything to get there. They'll play rubbish football, they'll spunk loads of money on whoever, just to try and get a chance of getting that Premier League prize pot. Yeah, we're doing everything the right way, and we've won the league twice in a row. So
and the reason the championship is so crazy is the reason that League One now has 7 ex-Premier League teams in it.
Exactly that.
The teams lose the plot, they get relegated. Obviously, some have been in it longer than others, but you're looking at League One this season, which is why Ipswich are having to, I think, gamble on stupid amounts, because you're looking at Portsmouth, Sunderland, Charlton, Portsmouth, Wigan, Ipswich, and then, but not only did the Sheffield Wednesday teams come down from the Championship, all of a sudden Bolton arrived from League Two to make life difficult for everybody as well. So you're looking at League One, but some of that, Bolton being League Two, is because teams have been, bloody stupid in the Premier League or in the Championship. Which again, while fans moan about the club not spending this or that, they do need to look at the league table and see who's in League One and who's in League Two, where teams are. Forest have been spending a lot of money on wages over the last few years. Look where they are. It doesn't. Having money obviously does help massively.
Having Chris Hughton in charge of your team doesn't, I would argue. I see him in borrowed time at Forest. Just on Sunderland, I think it's an amazing thing. I did their game the other day, and I was looking at my notes before it, and I was like, this is their 4th season in that league. And I'm thinking, how has that happened? For Sunderland, like, who are a big team.
Yeah.
And I'm just, do you know what? League One's fascinating this season, because for all those teams you've mentioned, you've got the likes of Burton Albion enjoying an absolute renaissance in Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank's second spell as manager. And they're just one of many examples. Lincoln are doing really exciting stuff as well. There's so many teams. And then you've got the likes of MK Dons, who have replaced Russ with another fascinating appointment that could go like any sort of number of ways. And that is a really fun division.
Yeah, you've got Rotherham United to get out of the league. Obviously, Wycombe, Oxford have got a decent manager, as we said. But it's when Norwich got relegated, they were relatively lucky, and I know there was obviously Southampton had a points deduction, Leeds were there, but and I know sort of relatively teams have been able to bounce back out relatively quickly, haven't they? Leicester as well. But now you've got these 7 teams, League One, all of a sudden. And by the way, I think people forget that Norwich's support, but they were still, their average was better, so much better than Leicester's and Southampton's, and most weeks better than
Still
Leeds.
proud of that, by the way.
Yeah, so which is why my only criticism of the board, my only one in the last 10 years, was the initial promise with Bowkett and McNally was we'll try and sort the stadium out after one season in the Premier League. I felt rather than spend money on the Naismiths and the Matt Jarvises was to improve the stadium. That's the only thing I wish that they'd have done 8-9 years ago, because you're looking at Leicester selling out. They're increasing the crowd to 40,000 now. I still think Norwich would sell that out every week. And I know people look at some empty seats for Premier League games. It just doesn't work like that. When your ground's bigger and you know that you can, there's more. The ground's bigger. Invariably, you can put 10,000 on a gate, even if you're not always selling out 300 or 400 like they are at Carrow Road. I probably haven't explained myself very well, but my point being is that I do believe they did increase the city stand. They'd really they'd be absolutely fine. Certainly 36,000 would be fine.
So my only question with that is access and egress. Would there be some issues with that? Because obviously you're next to quite an important road in the city if you do move that back, and then obviously car parking, not masses really compared to some stadia.
It's not, but you're looking at some of the London, the London. I know you say you've got obviously public transport, but Leicester's in the middle of nowhere, and it's just on a few junctions, and there's, I think, way less car parking, and I still think Norwich, even some of the car parks the other side of the city, and at least you do have a train station there. I don't think it's any different. Southampton. It's the middle of nowhere, and it's by the side of a river as well. And it's longer to walk to the railway station. So certainly, I think 34,000. I would love to see. They've got it right at the training ground, and that would be the next thing. I know the importance of staying in the division, but that would be my only thing I'd like to have seen from the club in the last decade, because how they've sold out in the second tier and most games even in League One, really getting good crowds in that was better than the teams I just mentioned. So.
I don't know the finances or something like that, but I would suggest that I could imagine where a supporter based like Norwich Cities, you would make your money back fairly quickly.
Yeah,
how you amplified it.
The problem is it would cost a lot more now. So I'm not saying they should suddenly build it now, because it does cost a lot more. My regret is that a decade ago, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, when they said they would do if we stayed up one season, I wish they'd done it now, because it cost, as I said, I know hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I'd have rather had a new stand than Matt Jarvis and Stephen Naismith, to be fair.
Well, football, benefit of hindsight, it's one of the great things.
I know.
It's a fun adventure being a Norwich fan, mate. I mean, I'm a later convert than you, but I'm so glad that I am. And I think just the BK thing aside, I've not had one moment where I've questioned it. And it's been one of I said this in the launch video for this podcast, been my journey to being a Norwich fan has been one of the greatest journeys of my life, definitely in a sporting sense. So that's something that I'm really grateful for. And I'm really grateful to you for coming on, mate. This has been a fascinating chat. I've really enjoyed it. And everybody can obviously go and find you at Charlie Wyett on Twitter. If you've got any questions for me, everyone, then please do get them in. You can DM me and stuff like that. I've realised that we've gone on a bit longer than I was expecting. So we're now, an hour and 10 minutes away from me doing my Twitter space with Michael Bailey. That will be a regular feature on most Fridays after the press conference, which is probably just wrapped up as we speak, I'm guessing. Won't be the normal duration of these things. But yes, join me for the Twitter space with Michael Bailey at 3:00, which you can do at Hodgeythehack on Twitter. Remember, you can find this podcast on YouTube. Thanks to everyone for watching. You can subscribe on YouTube if you're listening to the podcast player and you prefer to your podcast. You can do it on there just by searching for Hodge On Nodge on all the major podcast players. So all that remains for me is to thank Charlie.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you guys for listening, and say, well, you know what I say now. I say it all the time. On the ball, City.